I did a video recently of the backstory of OpenToonz, how OpenToonz is the open source version of the animation software Toonz, which was created by Digital Video in Rome, Italy. That video got a lot of interest, and among the comments I received a nice one from an animator in Rome, Franco, who had used Toonz in his animation studio back in the late 90s. Franco mentioned Gian Marco Todesco, who was one of the key creators of Toonz and did a lot of the programming and development work on it. So that made me think, what do I actually know about Toonz? Maybe I could dig a little deeper and uncover some of its backstory. And so in this video I will take a closer look at the background of Toonz, the precursor of OpenToonz, and the company and the people who created it. Thanks once again for dropping into my animation channel, I really appreciate it. The story of Toonz began in Rome, Italy back in 1981. Italy, the country that gave us pizza, pasta and gelato, not to mention the espresso. And of course they gave us a lot more than that. The ancient Romans were fantastic engineers, as we know, building aqueducts, roads and bridges all around the European empire. And today, over 2,000 years later, most of them are still standing. None of that engineering prowess and inventiveness has been lost over the millennia. Just look, for instance, at the motor industry. Mention names like Ferrari, Maserati and Lamborghini, and you immediately know that ingenious Italian engineering and fine craftsmanship were involved. And of course, let's not forget the Vespa. So then it perhaps wouldn't surprise you to learn that the people who brought us Toonz, which later became OpenToonz, were Italian, and pretty smart guys too. Gian Marco Todesco, the guy that Franco mentioned, is a professor of maths and physics and worked on much of the development of Toonz. It all started in the suburbs of Rome in 1981. The company that created Toonz, Digital Video, was founded by Gian Marco Todesco, Francesco Danza, the president of the company, and Claudio Mattei, the current CEO. Somewhere along the way, the physicist Marco Cosolino joined the team. But to be honest, Google was not the best source of information on the company structure. So if any of this information is incorrect, please forgive me, let me know, and I'll certainly amend it. We can see a few of these people mentioned above presenting here at Eurocon 2021. At the top is Marco Cosolino, the physicist. Claudio Mattei, the CEO of Digital Video, is below him in the middle, and at the bottom, giving the presentation, is Shun Iwasawa. I mentioned Shun in the previous video about the OpenToonz backstory, but just to recap, Shun works for Studio Ghibli as a programmer and visual developer, and has been instrumental in many of the developments of Toonz and OpenToonz over the years. Here Shun is discussing the workflow of a film animated at Studio Ghibli, and where OpenToonz is used in the pipeline. Anyway, on with the story. I found an old Italian TV program that showed a day in the life of Gian Marco Todesco during the time that Toonz was being developed. I'm guessing this would have been back in the mid to late 80s, maybe the early 90s. Here we can see Professor Todesco teaching students at the architecture faculty in Rome. He is discussing how mathematics and art go hand in hand, especially in the field of architecture and design. Then he is off to the offices of Digital Video, to his second job, working with the developers of Toonz. In these early years, the newly formed Digital Video company had a focus on developing cutting-edge technologies and CGI, which was a new thing back in those days. Toonz quickly became their focus in those first years of the company. After years of work, they released the initial version of Toonz in 1993. A distribution agreement was signed with Soft Image, which distributed the software as Creative Toonz. The product at this stage was used in some productions such as Emblemation's Balto in 1995. After Microsoft acquired Soft Image, Toonz was optimized to run on Windows so it could be marketed as Microsoft Toonz. Toonz underwent improvements on the tools and user interface, and by Toonz version 4, new features like the pencil test, palette editor, Xsheet, ink and paint module, and the flip module were added. By the time Toonz 5.0 came out, it supported vector graphics with continued support for raster graphics, either scanned in or generated inside the program, thus allowing users to step into paperless animation. Version 6.0 was made available as Toonz Harlequin, and was created in collaboration with Studio Ghibli. It allowed for traditional and paperless animation workflows. Other new features included raster vector conversion, palette styles, and options for rendering image sequences and video clips. Toonz Bravo 6.3ml got animation libraries for characters and props, palettes with linked styles and smart color models, links and dependencies among peg bars, cameras, and the table. It also got visual effects, including a 2D particle engine and batch rendering with render farms. Version 6.4 brought along a new algorithm for the raster to vector converter, the interactive color editing, and the smart FX schematic editing. Version 7 introduced new features such as mesh deformation with bones, new effects, symmetric backgrounds, 3D stereoscopic rendering, amongst others. By now it was 2016 and almost 30 years had passed since the start of the Toonz project. And at that point in March 2016, Digital Video announced that Toonz would be released as a free and open source software after a deal was concluded with Duango of Japan. And so OpenToonz as we know it was born. The source code of OpenToonz was released to a GitHub repository on March 26, 2016. It has been used by other projects such as Tahoma 2D developed by Jeremy Bullock. Tahoma 2D focuses on ease of use but is based on OpenToonz and shares most of its features. Digital Video continues to develop and market a Toonz premium version. Toonz was one of their first products, but they've gone on to create products used in film and television by most of the big players, including CNN, Fox, BBC and Sky. Apart from animation, broadcast and feature film, they have applied their technology and R&D skills in other markets such as mobile apps and various industries including defense and security and the biomedical sector. But to us, as animators, of course, Toonz was their greatest creation. I came across an American animator and director of a mid-sized animation studio up in Portland, Oregon. They started using Toonz back in the 90s when it was being marketed by Soft Image as Soft Image Toonz. Soft Image, as we mentioned earlier, was acquired by Microsoft in the 90s and was eventually sold off to Autodesk. You know, the people who brought us AutoCAD, 3ds Max and Maya. Anyway, I found an interview of this director and animator where he gushed about Toonz and its abilities. Here is some of that interview. Back then the software program was called Soft Image Toonz. I still use this program today. This 2D software was developed by an Italian company which is still operating in Rome as an independent animation software developer. This software was absolutely incredible. In the late 90s, software programs were starting to be developed that helped traditional animators have a lot of power in producing animation. This program allowed me to scan in the drawings in complete registration, digitally paint the animation very quickly, which was not the case back in the day, and then composite all the elements into scenes with unlimited layers. A lot of the scenes had over 100 layers. You had all sorts of camera controls and special effects capabilities. When everything was ready, I rendered out to whatever file format the client requested. Having this animation program back then was critical for my studio to produce the amount of animation we had to produce. So that's basically the story of Toonz right there. This animator used Toonz in his Portland animation studio and still used it at the time of the interview. He was a very happy customer of Toonz, as was Franco, the guy from Italy who commented on my last video and started this whole ball rolling. Franco had an animation studio in Rome and they were using Toonz back in the late 90s. And that's why he knew of Gian Marco Todesco and his hand in the creation of Toonz. Digital Video has gone on to sell over 4,000 licenses of Toonz to date in over 68 countries. It's been a real success story. Unfortunately, because it's freely available amongst other things, we can't see the numbers of users who have used or downloaded OpenToonz, but I can only imagine it's several thousand and growing. One of the biggest OpenToonz based channels on YouTube, Noble Studio, has almost 200,000 subscribers at this stage, and I'm sure it's safe to say a lot, if not most of them, are OpenToonz users. So I would guess the amount of animators who use OpenToonz globally is actually quite large, which really wouldn't surprise me given its history and its Studio Ghibli link. As I mentioned in my previous video, Studio Ghibli has used Toonz since 1995 and OpenToonz since 2016, and have used both in all of their movies since Princess Mononoke. These include My Neighbors the Yamadas, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, Ponyo, and Variety, and most recently The Boy and the Heron in 2023. Also, Studio Ponic, founded by the former Studio Ghibli producer Yoshiaki Nishimura, used OpenToonz in their first feature Mary and the Witch's Flower in 2017. Rough Draft Studio used Toonz in the production of Futurama, Steven Universe, and much of SpongeBob SquarePants. They also created the Max for MTV using Toonz. Fox produced Anastasia using Toonz, and many Japanese films and productions including Batman Ninja, Natsuzoro, Okozen, Promare, Belle, and more used Toonz. Even Steven Spielberg's animation company Emblemation used Toonz to create Balto, as mentioned earlier. So that's as much information as I could find on Toonz and the amazing people who brought it to life. Thank you, Franco, for prompting me to dig a bit deeper into the backstory here. It's certainly been interesting and fun uncovering this information. And it's a really amazing story. And like all good stories, it has a happy ending. And the happy ending is that Toonz became OpenToonz, and now this wonderful 2D animation software is available to the world, open source and free. What a gift. Thank you, good people at Digital Video. We really appreciate it. If you have not yet tried OpenToonz, I encourage you to do so by downloading it at the OpenToonz GitHub site and give it a spin. You won't be disappointed, as it is as well crafted and performs as well as the Italian supercars it shares its home with. I hope you enjoyed this backstory of OpenToonz and Toonz. And if you haven't checked out my video about the backstory of OpenToonz, why don't you check that out? I'll put the link at the end of this video. To Franco from Italy, thank you for the mention in the comments section and for planting the seed which led to this video. Grazie mille. Thanks once again for dropping into my channel. All the best out there and happy animating with OpenToonz. And as I say in Italy, ciao.